The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Carson's training grounds as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her uniform for what felt like the 100th time that week. She had been stationed at this Colorado base for 6 months now, transferred from her previous assignment in Germany, where she had served with distinction for 3 years. The transition hadn't been easy, but Maria was determined to prove herself once again in this new environment. Maria came from a military family. Her father had served in Vietnam, and her older brother was currently deployed overseas. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had always known she wanted to serve her country, despite the challenges she knew she would face as a woman in what was still largely considered a man's world. At 26, she had already accomplished more than many of her peers, earning commendations for her leadership skills and tactical expertise. The thing that set Maria apart from many of her fellow soldiers wasn't just her dedication or her skills. It was the intricate tattoo that covered most of her left shoulder and upper arm. The design was a beautiful and meaningful piece of art that told the story of her heritage and her family's military service. At the center was an eagle with outstretched wings, symbolizing freedom and strength. Surrounding it were roses representing her Mexican-American heritage, intertwined with dog tags bearing the names of family members who had served before her. The entire piece was done in rich colors with exceptional detail, created by a renowned artist in San Antonio during her last leave. For Maria, the tattoo wasn't just body art. It was a tribute to her roots, her family's sacrifices, and her own commitment to service. Every element had deep personal meaning. The eagle's feathers contained subtle details that represented different battles her father had fought in Vietnam. The roses included her grandmother's favorite variety, honoring the woman who had raised her while her father was deployed during her childhood. The dog tags bore not just names, but dates of service, creating a timeline of her family's military legacy. However, not everyone at Fort Carson appreciated the artistry or understood the meaning behind Maria's tattoo. From her first day at the base, she had noticed the stares and whispered comments from some of the other female soldiers in her unit. While the military had relaxed many of its tattoo policies in recent years, allowing more visible ink as long as it wasn't offensive or excessive, there was still an undercurrent of judgment, particularly among certain groups. The criticism began subtly. During PT sessions, when soldiers were tank tops, Maria would catch glimpses of other women looking at her tattoo and shaking their heads. In the mess hall, she overheard fragments of conversations about appropriate professional appearance and setting the right example. The comments stung, but Maria tried to focus on her duties and prove herself through her work rather than engage with the negativity. Lieutenant Sarah Chun was one of the most vocal critics, though she was careful to keep her comments just out of earshot of the senior NCOs. Sarah came from a military family as well, but her background was quite different from Maria's. Her father was a colonel, and she had grown up on various bases around the world, attending elite military schools and always being groomed for leadership. Sarah viewed the military through a very traditional lens and believed that certain standards should never be compromised, even as policies evolved. "I just think there's a time and place for self-expression," Sarah would say to her circle of friends during off-duty hours. "When you're representing the United States Army, you need to look the part. That kind of elaborate artwork just seems unprofessional to me. I don't care how meaningful it is to her personally." Sarah's comments carried weight because of her family connections and her position as one of the few female officers in the unit. Several of the younger enlisted women looked up to her and began to echo her sentiments. Soon, what had started as whispered criticisms became more open discussions about maintaining proper military bearing and the importance of professional appearance. The situation became more uncomfortable for Maria when she realized that some of the women were actively excluding her from informal gatherings and social events. While she had never been one to seek out attention or demand inclusion, the isolation was beginning to affect her morale. She found herself eating meals alone more often and spending her free time in her barracks room rather than in the common areas where other soldiers gathered. Maria's direct supervisor, Sergeant First Class James Thompson, was a fair and experienced leader who had noticed the tension in the unit. He had served for 15 years and had seen his share of personality conflicts and social dynamics among soldiers. While he couldn't address every interpersonal issue, he was concerned about anything that might affect unit cohesion and mission readiness. During one of their regular one-on-one meetings, Sergeant Thompson asked Maria how she was adjusting to life at Fort Carson. Maria was careful not to complain directly about her fellow soldiers, but She admitted that the transition had been more challenging than she had expected. I understand that different units have different cultures, Maria told him. I'm just focused on doing my job and contributing to our mission. Sometimes it takes time for people to get to know each other and build trust. Sergeant Thompson appreciated Maria's diplomatic response, but he could sense there was more to the story. He had observed some of the social dynamics in the unit and had heard rumors about tensions among some of the female soldiers. As a leader, he knew that these kinds of issues could escalate if not addressed properly. The breaking point came during a training exercise in late October. The unit was participating in a week-long field training event that would test their combat readiness and teamwork under simulated battlefield conditions. For Maria, this was an opportunity to demonstrate her tactical skills and prove her value to the unit. She had excelled in similar exercises at her previous base and was confident in her abilities. However, the exercise would also bring the unit's interpersonal tensions to the surface in ways that no one could have predicted. Living in close quarters, under stress, and with limited privacy, the soldiers would be forced to confront issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. On the first day of the exercise, as the soldiers prepared their gear and established their temporary camp, Maria overheard a conversation that would change everything. A group of female soldiers were discussing room assignments for their shared tents, and Lieutenant Shun was explaining why she preferred not to be housed with certain people. I just think we should room with people who share our values and standards, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the camp. I don't want to spend a week looking at that ridiculous tattoo and listening to stories about why it's so meaningful. This is supposed to be a professional military exercise, not a celebration of personal artwork. The comment was clearly directed at Maria, even though Sarah hadn't used her name. Several other soldiers laughed and nodded in agreement. Maria felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment, but she maintained her composure and continued preparing her equipment. She had dealt with criticism and prejudice before, but this public humiliation felt different, more personal, and more damaging to her reputation within the unit. That evening, as the soldiers settled into their temporary accommodations, Maria found herself assigned to a tent with two other women who had clearly been chosen because they were among the few who hadn't actively participated in the criticism of her tattoo. While she appreciated not being completely isolated, she could sense the awkwardness and knew that her tent mates were uncomfortable with the situation. As she lay in her sleeping bag that first night, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down around her, Maria reflected on her situation. She had always prided herself on her resilience and her ability to overcome challenges through hard work and determination. But this felt different. The criticism wasn't about her performance or her abilities. It was about something deeply personal and meaningful to her. She thought about her father, who had faced his own share of discrimination and prejudice during his military service. He had always told her that the best response to criticism was excellence in performance and unwavering commitment to her duties. But she also knew that sometimes silence in the face of injustice could be interpreted as acceptance or weakness. The next morning brought new challenges as the training exercise began in earnest. The soldiers were divided into teams and given various tactical scenarios to complete. Maria found herself assigned to a squad led by Lieutenant Shun, which she suspected was not a coincidence. Sarah seemed determined to put Maria in difficult positions and highlight any mistakes or shortcomings. During the first tactical exercise, Maria's squad was tasked with establishing a defensive perimeter around a simulated forward operating base. Maria's experience and training made her naturally suited for this type of mission, and she quickly identified the best positions for their weapons systems and observation posts. However, when she offered suggestions to Lieutenant Shun, her ideas were dismissed without consideration. I think I can handle the tactical planning, Sarah said curtly. Just focus on following orders and keeping up with the rest of the squad. The dismissive attitude continued throughout the day, with Sarah consistently overlooking Maria's input and assigning her to less critical tasks. It was clear that the lieutenant was trying to marginalize her and prevent her from demonstrating her capabilities. Other members of the squad noticed the treatment, but were reluctant to speak up against an officer. By the end of the second day, Maria was feeling frustrated and demoralized. She had performed all of her assigned tasks competently, but she hadn't been given the opportunity to showcase the skills and experience that had earned her recognition at her previous assignments. She began to wonder if transferring to Fort Carson had been a mistake and whether she would ever find acceptance in this unit. The situation reached a crisis point on the third day when the unit faced its most challenging exercise yet. They were tasked with conducting a simulated rescue mission in difficult terrain, requiring coordination between multiple teams and careful execution under time pressure. The success of the mission would depend on every soldier performing at their best and working together effectively. As the teams prepared for the mission, Maria noticed increased tension and anxiety among the soldiers. This was the kind of high-stakes exercise that could make or break careers, and everyone knew that their performance would be closely evaluated by the senior leadership observing the training. Little did anyone know that the events of the next few hours would completely transform the dynamics within the unit and force everyone to reconsider their assumptions about courage, leadership, and what it truly meant to be a soldier. The rescue mission would become a turning point not just for Maria, but for everyone who had judged her based on appearance rather than character. The morning of the third day dawned cold and overcast, with a light fog hanging over the training area. As Maria checked her equipment and prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging exercise of the week, she had no idea that by the end of the day, everything would be different. The women who had mocked her tattoo and questioned her professionalism were about to learn exactly what kind of soldier she really was. The rescue mission briefing began at 0600 hours in a makeshift command tent that had been erected the night before. The scenario was complex and realistic, designed to test every aspect of the soldiers' training and teamwork. Intelligence reports indicated that a reconnaissance team had gone missing in hostile territory, and multiple search and rescue teams would need to coordinate their efforts to locate and extract the missing soldiers before enemy forces could capture them. Major Patricia Williams, the exercise coordinator, stood before a detailed map of the training area as she explained the mission parameters. The terrain was challenging, featuring dense forest, rocky outcroppings, and a river system that would complicate movement and communication. Weather conditions were expected to deteriorate throughout the day, adding another layer of difficulty to the operation. This exercise will test your ability to operate under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and work as a cohesive unit, Major Williams explained. The missing team's last known position was here. She pointed to a spot on the map approximately 3 miles from their current location. However, their exact whereabouts are unknown, and enemy forces are actively patrolling the area. The soldiers were divided into 3 teams, each with specific responsibilities. Alpha Team would advance along the northern route, Bravo Team would take the southern approach, and Charlie Team would provide overwatch and communication support from elevated positions. Maria found herself assigned to Alpha Team, which was led by Lieutenant Chun and included several of the women who had been most critical of her appearance. As the teams prepared to move out, Maria conducted a final check of her equipment. Her role was designated as the team's communications specialist, a position that required her to maintain contact with the other teams and relay critical information during the mission. It was an important responsibility, but she suspected that Lieutenant Chun had assigned her to this role primarily to keep her in a support position rather than allowing her to take a more active leadership role. The morning air was crisp and filled with tension as Alpha Team began their movement toward the objective area. The soldiers moved in a tactical formation, maintaining proper spacing and communication discipline as they navigated through the forest. Maria carried the team's primary radio system, a sophisticated piece of equipment that would be essential for coordinating with the other teams and the command post. For the first hour of movement, everything proceeded according to plan. The team maintained good pace and stayed on their designated route. Maria monitored radio traffic from the other teams and provided regular position updates to the command post. Despite the ongoing tensions within the group, the soldiers were performing their duties professionally and maintaining focus on the mission. However, as they approached the target area, the situation began to change rapidly. The weather, which had been overcast but stable, suddenly began to deteriorate. A cold front moved through the area, bringing with it heavy rain and strong winds that reduced visibility and made movement more difficult. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the soldiers found themselves dealing with increasingly challenging conditions. Lieutenant Chun called for a brief halt to assess the situation and adjust their approach. As the team took cover under a grove of trees, she studied her map and tried to determine the best way to continue toward the objective. The rain was making the terrain more treacherous, and the reduced visibility was making navigation more difficult. Rodriguez, what's the status on communications with the other teams? Sarah asked, her voice tense with the stress of command responsibility. Maria adjusted her radio and attempted to establish contact with Bravo and Charlie teams. However, the weather was interfering with radio transmission, and she was only able to make intermittent contact with the other units. This was a common problem in mountainous terrain during adverse weather, but it added another layer of complexity to an already challenging mission. "I'm getting some static interference, ma'am," Maria reported. "I can reach Bravo team about half the time, but Charlie team's signal is very weak. The weather is definitely affecting our communications capability." Sarah frowned as she processed this information. Communications were critical for a coordinated rescue mission, and the degraded radio capability meant they would have to rely more heavily on individual team initiative and judgment. It was exactly the kind of complication that made these training exercises valuable, but also stressful for leaders. As Alpha Team resumed their movement toward the objective, the conditions continued to worsen. The rain had turned the forest floor into a slippery, muddy surface that made quiet movement nearly impossible. The soldiers had to concentrate on each step to avoid slipping and potentially injuring themselves or alerting simulated enemy forces to their presence. About 30 minutes into their resumed advance, the team encountered their first major obstacle. They came upon a steep ravine that hadn't been clearly marked on their maps. The ravine was approximately 20 feet wide and 12 feet deep, with steep sides that would be difficult to navigate, especially in the current weather conditions. Lieutenant Chen studied the obstacle and considered their options. They could attempt to cross at this location, which would be dangerous and time-consuming, or they could move along the ravine looking for a better crossing point, which would take them off their planned route and potentially into unknown territory. "What do you think, Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, surprising Maria by soliciting her opinion. "You've done this kind of terrain navigation before. What would you recommend?" Maria carefully examined the ravine and the surrounding terrain. Her experience in Germany had included extensive training in mountain and forest operations, and she had developed good judgment about these kinds of tactical decisions. She could see that attempting to cross at this point would be risky and would likely result in injury to one or more team members. "I'd recommend moving north about 200 meters, Maria suggested. "Based on the topography, there should be a natural crossing point where the ravine narrows. It'll add about 10 minutes to our movement time, but it'll be much safer and quieter than trying to cross here." Sarah considered the recommendation and nodded. "Good assessment. We'll move north and look for a better crossing point." As they moved along the ravine, Maria noticed a change in the lieutenant's attitude toward her. The stress of the mission and the challenging conditions seemed to be breaking down some of the artificial barriers that had been erected over the previous months. When faced with real tactical decisions and genuine leadership challenges, Sarah was beginning to focus more on competence and experience rather than personal prejudices. They found the crossing point that Maria had predicted, and the team was able to navigate the obstacle without incident. As they continued toward the objective area, Maria's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Bravo team. The message was broken and difficult to understand due to the weather interference, but she was able to make out enough to understand that they had encountered a problem. "Alpha team, this is Bravo team." The garbled transmission came through. "We've got injured soldier. Need immediate medical evacuation." Maria quickly attempted to clarify the transmission and get more details about Bravo team's situation. After several attempts, she was able to piece together that one of their soldiers had suffered what appeared to be a serious ankle injury while navigating difficult terrain. The soldier was unable to continue with the mission and required immediate medical attention. Lieutenant Chun faced a difficult decision. The original mission called for Alpha Team to continue toward the objective area and search for the missing reconnaissance team. However, Bravo Team needed assistance with their injured soldier, and the degraded communications made it difficult to coordinate a response with the command post. "Rodriguez, can you reach the command post and inform them about Bravo Team's situation?" Sarah asked. Maria tried repeatedly to establish contact with the command post, but the weather interference was too severe. She was able to maintain intermittent contact with Charlie Team, but they were positioned too far away to provide immediate assistance to Bravo Team. "I can't get through to the command post, ma'am," Maria reported. "But I do have a suggestion. If we modify our route slightly, we could link up with Bravo Team, assist with their casualty evacuation, and still accomplish our primary mission. It would require some creative navigation, but it's definitely feasible." Sarah looked at Maria with a new level of respect. The suggestion demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and problem-solving ability that marked a good soldier. Despite months of tension and criticism, Maria was focusing entirely on mission accomplishment and the welfare of her fellow soldiers. "Explain your plan," Sarah said. Maria pulled out her map and showed Lieutenant Chun how they could adjust their route to intersect with Bravo team's position. The modified approach would actually give them a better angle of attack on the objective area, and by combining forces, they would have more personnel available for both the casualty evacuation and the search mission. "The key is timing," Maria explained. "If we move quickly, we can link up with Bravo team, establish a casualty collection point, and then continue the search with a combined force. Charlie team can provide overwatch for the evacuation route while we advance on the objective." Sarah studied the plan and realized that it was not only tactically sound but actually superior to their original approach. The modified plan would accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously and demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking that distinguished exceptional soldiers from average ones. "Outstanding," Sarah said. "Let's execute your plan. Take point and guide us to the link-up with Bravo team." As Maria moved to the front of the formation and began leading the team toward Bravo team's position, she felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal vindication. This was what she had joined the army for, the opportunity to use her skills and training to help her fellow soldiers and accomplish important missions. The movement to Bravo team's location required careful navigation through increasingly difficult terrain. The rain had intensified, and visibility was now severely limited. Maria used her compass and map reading skills to guide the team through the forest, checking their position regularly and adjusting their route as necessary to account for obstacles and terrain features. When Alpha Team finally reached Bravo Team's location, they found a scene that was more serious than the radio transmissions had indicated. Private Jessica Martinez had not only injured her ankle but had also suffered a head injury when she fell. She was conscious but disoriented, and her team leader was clearly concerned about her condition. Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh, Bravo Team's leader, was relieved to see Alpha Team arrive. "Rodriguez, am I glad to see you," he said. "Martinez took a bad fall about 20 minutes ago. Her ankle is definitely broken, and I'm worried about a possible concussion. We need to get her out of here as soon as possible." Maria quickly assessed the situation and began coordinating the casualty evacuation. Her training included advanced first aid and combat medical techniques, and she was able to provide immediate care for Private Martinez while organizing the team's response. "We need to establish a secure landing zone for medical evacuation," Maria told Lieutenant Chun. "There's a clearing about 300 meters south of here that should work. If we can get a stretcher team organized, we can have Martinez at the landing zone in 15 minutes. The next hour became a blur of coordinated activity as the combined teams worked to evacuate the injured soldier and continue with their search mission. Maria took charge of the medical aspects of the operation, her training and experience making her the natural choice to lead this critical part of the mission. As they carried Private Martinez toward the evacuation point, the weather continued to worsen. The rain had turned into a driving storm that made movement treacherous and communication nearly impossible. However, Maria's leadership and tactical expertise kept the operation moving smoothly despite the challenging conditions. It was during this evacuation that something remarkable happened. The women who had spent months criticizing Maria's tattoo and questioning her professionalism found themselves depending on her knowledge, experience, and leadership to accomplish a critical mission and potentially save a fellow soldier's life. Lieutenant Chun, in particular, began to see Maria in an entirely different light. The woman she had dismissed as unprofessional was demonstrating exactly the kind of competence, dedication, and selfless service that represented the best of the military profession. The tattoo that had seemed so important in garrison suddenly became completely irrelevant in the face of real challenges and genuine leadership. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived at the landing zone just as the storm reached its peak intensity. The pilot had to demonstrate exceptional skill to land safely in the deteriorating weather conditions, and the medical crew worked quickly to stabilize Private Martinez and prepare her for transport to the base hospital. Maria coordinated with the flight medic to ensure that all relevant information about the injury was communicated, and she provided a detailed briefing on the care that had been administered in the field. As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the storm, the remaining soldiers faced a critical decision. The original mission to locate and rescue the missing reconnaissance team was still incomplete, The weather conditions had become genuinely dangerous. Visibility was now less than 50 meters, and the combination of rain, wind, and dropping temperatures was creating conditions that could lead to hypothermia and other cold weather injuries. Lieutenant Shun gathered the combined teams under a grove of trees that provided some protection from the storm. She had to make a command decision about whether to continue with the mission or abort and return to base. It was exactly the kind of leadership challenge that separated good officers from exceptional ones, and she was very aware that her decision would be evaluated by the senior leaders who were monitoring the exercise. "What's your assessment of our current situation, Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, again turning to Maria for tactical advice. Maria had been monitoring the weather conditions and tracking their progress toward the objective area. Her experience in similar conditions gave her insight into both the risks and the opportunities presented by their current situation. "The weather is definitely a significant factor," Maria reported. "However, we're actually very close to the objective area now. If we continue for another 30 minutes, we should reach the search zone. The storm might actually work to our advantage if there are simulated enemy forces in the area. They'll have the same visibility limitations we do." She paused to check her map and compass one more time before continuing. "My recommendation would be to continue the mission, but with modified tactics. We should move as one combined team rather than splitting up, and we should plan for a shorter search time before reassessing our situation." Sergeant Walsh nodded in agreement. "Rodriguez is right. We've come this far, and we have the capability to complete the mission. If we abort now, we'll have to start over tomorrow in potentially similar conditions." Sarah considered the input from both NCOs and made her decision. "We continue with the mission. Rodriguez, you take point and guide us to the objective area. Walsh, you coordinate rear security. Everyone else, maintain tight formation and stay alert." As the combined team resumed movement toward the objective area, Maria felt a growing sense of confidence and purpose. Despite the challenging conditions and the months of interpersonal tension, she was now being recognized for her tactical expertise and leadership abilities. The storm that had complicated their mission was also washing away the prejudices and assumptions that had created barriers within the unit. The movement through the storm required intense concentration and skill. Maria used dead reckoning navigation, checking her compass frequently and counting paces to maintain awareness of their position. The terrain was becoming increasingly treacherous as the rain turned the forest floor into a slippery, muddy surface that made each step potentially hazardous. About 20 minutes into their movement toward the objective, Maria heard something that made her signal for the team to halt. Through the sound of the storm, she had detected what sounded like human voices. The team took cover and listened carefully, trying to determine the source and nature of the sounds. "I hear at least 2 voices," Maria whispered to Lieutenant Shun. "They're coming from the direction of our objective area, approximately 100 meters ahead. The voices could belong to the missing reconnaissance team they were searching for, or they could represent simulated enemy forces that were part of the exercise scenario. Either way, the team would need to approach carefully and gather more information before taking action." Sarah made the tactical decision to conduct a reconnaissance before committing the entire team. "Rodriguez, Walsh, come with me. We'll move forward and try to identify the source of those voices. Everyone else, maintain security here and be ready to move on our signal." The 3 leaders moved carefully through the forest, using the storm noise to mask their approach. As they got closer to the source of the voices, they were able to determine that it was indeed the missing reconnaissance team. However, the situation was more complex than they had expected. The reconnaissance team consisted of 4 soldiers who had become disoriented in the storm and taken shelter in a small cave formation. One of them appeared to be injured, and they were clearly in distress. However, the exercise scenario also included simulated enemy forces who were supposed to be searching for the same team, and Maria spotted movement that suggested hostile forces were nearby. "We've got a tactical problem," Maria whispered to her teammates. "The recon team is in that cave, but there are enemy forces positioned on the ridge above them. If we're not careful, we could walk into an ambush." Sarah studied the terrain and realized that Maria was correct. The situation required careful planning and coordination to successfully extract the reconnaissance team without being detected by the enemy forces. It was exactly the kind of complex scenario that made these training exercises so valuable. "What do you recommend?" Sarah asked. Maria had been analyzing the tactical situation and had developed a plan that would allow them to accomplish the mission while avoiding the enemy forces. Her experience in Germany had included extensive training in small unit tactics and reconnaissance operations, and she understood how to use terrain and weather conditions to their advantage. "We need a diversion," Maria explained. "If we can create noise and movement on the eastern side of the area, the enemy forces will likely investigate. That will give us an opportunity to approach the cave from the west and extract the recon team." The plan required splitting their force and coordinating movements with precise timing. It was risky, but it offered the best chance of mission success under the current conditions. Sarah approved the plan, and they returned to brief the rest of the team. The execution of the extraction plan required every soldier to perform at their best. Maria led a small team that would create the diversion, while Sarah led the extraction team that would recover the reconnaissance soldiers. The timing had to be perfect, and communication would be critical despite the ongoing problems with radio reception. Maria's diversion team moved into position and began creating noise and movement that was designed to attract the attention of the enemy forces. The plan worked perfectly. The simulated hostile forces moved toward the diversion, leaving the approach to the cave unguarded. Sarah's extraction team was able to reach the reconnaissance soldiers and begin their evacuation without being detected. However, as they began moving the rescued soldiers away from the cave, one of them collapsed. The soldier, who had been suffering from exposure and dehydration, lost consciousness and required immediate medical attention. Once again, Maria's medical training became critical to the mission's success. "He's showing signs of severe hypothermia," Maria diagnosed after a quick examination. "We need to get his body temperature up and get him to medical care as quickly as possible." The situation was now critical. They had successfully located and extracted the missing reconnaissance team, but they had a soldier who required immediate medical evacuation. The weather conditions made helicopter extraction unlikely, and they were still several miles from their base camp. Maria took charge of the medical situation while Sarah coordinated the team's movement back toward base. Using techniques she had learned in her advanced medical training, Maria began treating the hypothermia victim while the team prepared for a challenging movement through the storm. The return journey became a test of endurance, teamwork, and leadership that pushed every member of the combined teams to their limits. They had to carry the unconscious soldier on a makeshift stretcher while navigating through difficult terrain in deteriorating weather conditions. Maria alternated between providing medical care and helping to guide the team through the forest. It was during this return journey that the true transformation in unit dynamics became apparent. The women who had spent months focusing on Maria's tattoo and questioning her professionalism were now working alongside her with complete trust and cooperation. Lieutenant Chun, in particular, had come to recognize Maria's exceptional capabilities and leadership potential. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology," Sarah said during one of their brief rest stops. "I've been focused on the wrong things. Your performance today has been outstanding, and I should have recognized your abilities months ago." Maria appreciated the acknowledgement, but her focus remained on the mission and the welfare of her fellow soldiers. "We all have different backgrounds and different ways of expressing ourselves," she replied. "What matters is that we work together effectively when it counts." The team finally reached their base camp after what felt like an eternity of movement through the storm. The unconscious soldier was immediately evacuated to the medical facility, where he made a full recovery. The successful completion of the mission despite the challenging conditions was recognized by the senior leadership as an exceptional example of soldier initiative, adaptability, and teamwork. Major Williams debriefed the teams the following morning, praising their performance and highlighting the lessons learned during the exercise. She specifically mentioned the leadership demonstrated by several individuals, including Maria's tactical expertise and medical skills that had been critical to the mission's success. This exercise demonstrated the importance of recognizing and utilizing the full capabilities of every team member, Major Williams told the assembled soldiers. "Success in complex operations requires us to look beyond surface appearances and focus on competence, dedication, and the ability to work effectively as a team." The debriefing session became an opportunity for the unit to discuss the lessons learned during the exercise, both tactical and interpersonal. Lieutenant Chin spoke publicly about how her assumptions had been challenged and how she had gained new respect for Maria's capabilities. Other soldiers who had participated in the criticism and exclusion also began to acknowledge their mistakes. For Maria, the exercise had been a turning point, but not in the way she had expected. Rather than proving herself through confrontation or argument, she had demonstrated her value through quiet competence and selfless service. The women who had mocked her tattoo had come to understand that true professionalism was about character and capability, not appearance. The transformation in unit dynamics was immediate and lasting. Maria found herself included in social activities and informal gatherings that had previously excluded her. More importantly, she was recognized as a leader and subject matter expert whose input was valued in both training and operational contexts. The tattoo that had been a source of controversy became a conversation starter as soldiers learned about Maria's heritage and family history of military service. The artwork that had once been seen as unprofessional was now understood as a meaningful expression of values that aligned perfectly with military service: honor, sacrifice, family, and dedication to something larger than oneself. Sarah Chun approached Maria privately a few days after the exercise to have a more detailed conversation about their relationship and the events of the previous months. It was a difficult conversation for Sarah, who had to confront her own prejudices and the impact her leadership had on unit morale and cohesion. The conversation between Maria and Sarah took place in the quiet of Sarah's office on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the training exercise had concluded. Sarah had requested the meeting, and Maria could sense the lieutenant's discomfort as she struggled to find the right words to address months of tension and misunderstanding. "Rodriguez, I need to be honest with you about something," Sarah began, her usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine humility. "My behavior toward you over the past several months has been unprofessional and unfair. I let my personal biases cloud my judgment, and I failed in my responsibility as a leader to create an inclusive environment for all soldiers in my unit." Maria listened carefully as Sarah continued. "I grew up in a very traditional military family, and I thought I understood what professionalism looked like. But this exercise showed me that I was focusing on appearances rather than substance. Your performance out there was exceptional, and I should have recognized your capabilities from the beginning." The lieutenant's admission was significant, not just because it represented personal growth, but because it demonstrated the kind of leadership accountability that created strong military units. Sarah was taking responsibility for her role in creating the hostile environment that had affected unit morale and Maria's experience at Fort Carson. "I appreciate you saying that," Maria responded. "I understand that everyone comes from different backgrounds and has different perspectives on what military bearing should look like. What's important is that we learn from these experiences and work together more effectively going forward." Sarah nodded and continued with her apology. "I also need to acknowledge that my comments and attitudes influenced other soldiers in the unit. I created an environment where it was acceptable to judge you based on your appearance rather than your performance. That was wrong, and I take full responsibility for the impact it had on you and on our unit's effectiveness." The conversation marked a turning point in their professional relationship, but it also opened up a broader discussion about leadership, diversity, and what it meant to serve in a modern military that was becoming increasingly inclusive while maintaining its traditional values and standards. Over the following weeks, the changes in unit dynamics became more apparent. Maria found herself being consulted on tactical matters and training scenarios where her experience and expertise were relevant. Lieutenant Chun began actively seeking her input on planning exercises and requested that she take on additional leadership responsibilities within the unit. The transformation wasn't limited to the relationship between Maria and Sarah. The other female soldiers who had participated in excluding and criticizing Maria began to engage with her more positively. Some approached her directly to apologize for their behavior, while others demonstrated their changed attitudes through their actions and inclusion of her in group activities. Private Jennifer Walsh, who had been one of the most vocal supporters of Lieutenant Chin's criticism, approached Maria during a break in training one afternoon. Jennifer was young and had joined the military straight out of high school, looking to Lieutenant Chun as a role model for how to conduct herself as a female soldier. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I wanted to talk to you about something," Jennifer said nervously. "I realize that I've been really unfair to you since you arrived here. I was following Lieutenant Chin's lead, but that's not an excuse. I should have made my own judgments based on getting to know you and seeing how you performed your duties." Jennifer's apology was particularly meaningful because she represented the younger soldiers who had been influenced by the negative atmosphere in the unit. Her recognition of her mistake and willingness to change demonstrated that the lessons learned during the training exercise were having a lasting impact on the unit's culture. "I appreciate you telling me that, Jennifer," Maria replied. We all make mistakes, and what matters is that we learn from them. I'd like to put this behind us and focus on working together effectively. The conversation with Jennifer was followed by similar interactions with other soldiers who had been part of the group that criticized Maria's tattoo. Each conversation was different, but they all reflected a growing understanding that military professionalism was about character, competence, and commitment rather than conformity to narrow expectations about appearance. As word of the training exercise spread throughout Fort Carson, Maria's reputation began to extend beyond her immediate unit. Other leaders heard about her performance during the rescue mission and her tactical expertise under challenging conditions. This recognition led to new opportunities for her to contribute to training programs and special projects. Colonel Robert Martinez, the battalion commander, called Maria into his office for a personal meeting about a month after the training exercise. Colonel Martinez had served for over 20 years and was known throughout the Army for his fair leadership and ability to develop talent among his subordinates. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I've been hearing some very positive things about your performance during the recent field training exercise, Colonel Martinez began. Major Williams gave me a detailed briefing on the mission, and she was particularly impressed with your tactical decision-making and leadership under pressure. The colonel's recognition was significant because it represented validation from the senior leadership that Maria's contributions were valued and noticed. It also suggested that her career prospects at Fort Carson were much brighter than they had appeared just a few weeks earlier. Thank you, sir, Maria responded. I was just doing my job and trying to contribute to our mission's success. The entire team worked well together under challenging conditions. Colonel Martinez appreciated Maria's modest response, but he wanted to discuss more than just her performance during the exercise. I'm also aware that there have been some interpersonal challenges within your unit over the past several months. While I don't need to know all the details, I want you to know that this command values diversity and expects all soldiers to be treated with respect and professionalism. The colonel's statement made it clear that the senior leadership was aware of the tensions that had existed within the unit and that they supported efforts to create a more inclusive environment. It also suggested that Lieutenant Chin's behavior and its impact on unit morale had not gone unnoticed by higher headquarters. I have an opportunity that might interest you, Colonel Martinez continued. We're developing a new training program focused on small unit tactics and leadership in challenging environments. Based on your background and recent performance, I'd like you to consider taking a leadership role in developing and implementing this program. The offer represented exactly the kind of career advancement opportunity that Maria had hoped for when she transferred to Fort Carson. More importantly, it would allow her to use her expertise and experience to train other soldiers and contribute to the Army's overall readiness and effectiveness. I would be honored to be considered for that assignment, sir, Maria replied. I believe my experience in Germany and my recent training here at Fort Carson would be valuable in developing realistic and effective training scenarios. The assignment to the training development program became official 2 weeks later, and Maria found herself working directly with the battalion's operations staff to create innovative training exercises. Her role involved not only developing tactical scenarios, but also mentoring younger soldiers and providing input on leadership development programs. The irony was not lost on anyone that Maria's tattoo, which had been criticized as unprofessional, actually became an asset in her new role. Young soldiers from diverse backgrounds saw her as someone who understood their perspective while also maintaining high military standards. Her ability to connect with soldiers from different cultural backgrounds made her particularly effective as a mentor and trainer. Lieutenant Chun, who had been initially resistant to Maria's promotion and new responsibilities, became one of her strongest supporters. Sarah began referring other officers to Maria for advice on tactical matters and recommended her for additional leadership development opportunities. I learned more about leadership in that one training exercise than I had in all my previous assignments combined, Sarah confided to Maria during one of their planning meetings. Watching you handle that crisis situation and maintain focus on the mission while caring for the welfare of every soldier. That's what real leadership looks like. The transformation in Sarah's perspective was complete, and she began using her own experience as a case study in her leadership development discussions with other young officers. She spoke openly about how her prejudices had affected her judgment and how important it was for military leaders to evaluate people based on their character and capabilities rather than their appearance. The success of the new training program that Maria helped develop gained attention throughout the division and eventually at higher levels of command. The realistic scenarios and emphasis on adaptive leadership under challenging conditions proved to be exactly what the Army needed to prepare soldiers for complex operational environments. Maria's reputation as a trainer and leader continued to grow, and she received invitations to participate in training programs at other installations. Her expertise was particularly valued in programs focused on mountain and cold weather operations, areas where her experience in Germany and her performance during the Stormy Rescue exercise had demonstrated exceptional competence. The tattoo that had once been a source of controversy became a symbol of the Army's evolution toward greater acceptance of diversity while maintaining its core values. Maria was frequently asked to speak to groups of soldiers about her experience, and she used these opportunities to discuss the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize the true value of individual contributions. One of the most meaningful recognition she received came in the form of a letter from Private Martinez, the soldier who had been injured during the training exercise and evacuated from medical treatment. Jessica had made a full recovery and had returned to duty, and she wanted to express her gratitude for the care and leadership Maria had provided during her medical emergency. Sergeant Rodriguez, I wanted you to know how much your actions during the training exercise meant to me and my family, Jessica wrote. When I was injured and scared, your calm competence and medical expertise probably saved my life. But more than that, your leadership helped bring our unit together and showed all of us what it means to put mission and people first. The letter from Private Martinez represented something more significant than personal gratitude. It demonstrated that Maria's actions during the crisis had created lasting positive change within the unit and had influenced how soldiers thought about leadership and service. As Maria reflected on the events of the past year, she realized that the challenges she had faced at Fort Carson had ultimately made her a better soldier and leader. The criticism and exclusion had been difficult to endure, but overcoming those obstacles had forced her to demonstrate her true character and capabilities in ways that might not have been necessary in a more supportive environment. The experience had also taught her valuable lessons about leadership and the responsibility that came with being a role model for other soldiers. She understood that her success had opened doors for other soldiers who might face similar challenges based on their appearance, background, or other factors that had nothing to do with their ability to serve effectively. The unit that had once been divided by prejudice and misunderstanding had become a cohesive team that valued each member's unique contributions while maintaining the highest military standards. The transformation had not been easy or immediate, but it had been lasting and meaningful for everyone involved. 6 months after the training exercise that had changed everything, Maria stood before a group of new soldiers who had just arrived at Fort Carson for their first assignment. As the senior instructor for the Advanced Leadership Development Program, she had been tasked with welcoming the newcomers and providing them with an orientation to the base's culture and expectations. The group consisted of 24 soldiers from diverse backgrounds, representing the modern face of the American military. There were men and women of different races, ethnicities, and cultural backgrounds, each bringing their own unique experiences and perspectives to their military service. Many of them had visible tattoos, piercings that had been allowed to heal, or other forms of personal expression that might have been controversial in previous generations. Welcome to Fort Carson, Maria began, her voice carrying the confidence and authority that had been earned through hard experience. Over the next few weeks, you'll be learning about our unit's standards, traditions, and expectations. But before we get into the technical details, I want to share something important with you about what it means to be a professional soldier. Maria paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the new soldiers. She could see in their faces the same mixture of excitement, nervousness, and determination that she had felt when she first arrived at the base. Some of them were clearly trying to assess how they would fit into the military culture and whether they would be accepted by their new unit. Professionalism in the military isn't about how you look or how you choose to express your cultural identity, Maria continued. It's about competence, dedication, and your willingness to put the mission and your fellow soldiers above your own interests. You'll be judged by your character, your performance, and your commitment to our shared values. The orientation session continued for 2 hours, covering everything from base facilities and training schedules to the history and traditions of their unit. But The underlying message throughout the presentation was clear. Every soldier's contribution was valued, and success would be measured by performance and character rather than conformity to narrow expectations about appearance. After the formal orientation, several of the new soldiers approached Maria with questions and comments. One young woman, Private Lisa Chun, coincidentally sharing a last name with Lieutenant Sarah Chun, was particularly interested in Maria's background and experience. Sergeant Rodriguez, I noticed your tattoo during the presentation, Lisa said. It's really beautiful artwork. I have some pieces myself, and I was wondering how acceptance has been here at Fort Carson. Maria smiled, remembering her own concerns when she had first arrived at the base. I won't lie to you, there can be challenges. Not everyone immediately sees past appearances to recognize what really matters. But if you focus on being the best soldier you can be, your work will speak for itself. The conversation with Private Chun and several other new soldiers gave Maria an opportunity to share some of the lessons she had learned over the past year. She emphasized the importance of maintaining high standards while also being true to their personal identity and cultural background. The military is evolving, Maria told the group. We're learning to value diversity and different perspectives while maintaining our core values and mission focus. Your job is to contribute to that evolution in a positive way. Later that evening, Maria received a phone call from her father in Texas. He had just received news that she had been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class, a significant advancement that would bring increased responsibility and leadership opportunities. The promotion was recognition of her exceptional performance over the past year and her contributions to the training development program. Mija, I am so proud of you, her father said, his voice emotional with pride. You've overcome every challenge and proven that our family's tradition of service continues with you. Your grandfather and your brother would be so proud of what you've accomplished. The promotion meant more to Maria than just career advancement. It represented validation of her approach to leadership and service, and it provided a platform for her to continue influencing positive change within the military. As a senior non-commissioned officer, she would have even greater opportunities to mentor young soldiers and help shape the culture of her unit. The ceremony for Maria's promotion took place 2 weeks later in the same building where she had endured months of criticism and exclusion. The irony was not lost on her as she stood before the assembled soldiers, including many who had once questioned her professionalism based on her appearance. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, who had been promoted since the events of the previous year, served as the presiding officer for the ceremony. Sarah's promotion had been partly due to her demonstrated growth as a leader and her willingness to acknowledge and learn from her mistakes. She had become a strong advocate for inclusive leadership and had implemented several programs designed to prevent the kind of discrimination that had initially affected Maria. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez represents the best of our Army's values, Sarah said during the promotion ceremony. Her dedication, competence, and leadership have made our entire unit stronger. She has shown us all what it means to serve with honor and distinction. The ceremony was attended by soldiers from throughout the battalion, including many who had worked with Maria on various training programs and special projects. Private Martinez, who had recovered completely from her training exercise injury, was there to witness the promotion of the NCO who had probably saved her life. Colonel Martinez also attended, along with other senior leaders who had come to recognize Maria's exceptional contributions. As Maria's new rank insignia was pinned on her uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The challenges she had faced at Fort Carson had been difficult and sometimes painful, but they had ultimately made her a stronger leader and a better soldier. More importantly, her experience had contributed to positive changes in her unit's culture that would benefit future soldiers. Following the promotion ceremony, there was a reception in the unit's conference room. Soldiers from all ranks mingled and congratulated Maria on her advancement. The atmosphere was warm and inclusive, a stark contrast to the tension and division that had characterized the unit just a year earlier. During the reception, Maria was approached by several soldiers who wanted to thank her for her mentorship and leadership. Private Jennifer Walsh, who had apologized months earlier for her role in criticizing Maria, had developed into an exceptional soldier under Maria's guidance and was now being considered for promotion herself. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Jennifer said with a smile, I wanted you to know that your example has changed how I think about leadership and service. You've taught me that being a good soldier means looking beyond surface differences and focusing on what really matters. The conversation with Jennifer was representative of many similar interactions throughout the evening. Soldiers who had learned from Maria's example and leadership were now implementing those lessons in their own roles and responsibilities. The positive changes that had begun with one person's determination to succeed despite adversity had rippled throughout the unit and beyond. As the reception wound down, Maria found herself in conversation with Colonel Martinez about her future assignments and career goals. The colonel had been tracking her progress and was interested in her thoughts about taking on even greater leadership challenges. "Your success here has gained attention at higher levels," Colonel Martinez told her. "There are opportunities available for you to work with training development at the division level or even at the Army's training centers. Your expertise in small unit tactics and leadership development is exactly what the Army needs." The conversation about future opportunities was exciting, but Maria also felt a strong commitment to continuing her work at Fort Carson. The unit had become more than just her assignment. It had become a place where she could continue to influence positive change and help other soldiers overcome challenges similar to those she had faced. "I appreciate the opportunities, sir," Maria replied. "But I think there's still important work to be done here. I'd like to continue developing our training programs and mentoring young soldiers who are just beginning their careers." Colonel Martinez respected Maria's decision to prioritize mentorship and unit development over rapid career advancement. It demonstrated the kind of selfless service and commitment to others that characterized the best military leaders. Over the following months, Maria continued to expand her role in training development and soldier mentorship. She created programs specifically designed to help soldiers from diverse backgrounds succeed in the military while maintaining their cultural identity and personal values. Her work became a model for other installations throughout the Army. The training programs that Maria developed emphasized the importance of team cohesion, mutual respect, and focusing on mission accomplishment rather than personal differences. Soldiers who completed her programs consistently demonstrated higher levels of performance and unit cohesion in subsequent assignments. 1 year after her promotion to Sergeant First Class, Maria received an invitation to speak at the Army's annual Equal Opportunity Conference. The conference brought together leaders from throughout the military to discuss best practices for creating inclusive environments while maintaining military standards and effectiveness. Maria's presentation focused on her experience at Fort Carson and the lessons learned from overcoming prejudice and discrimination through excellence in performance and leadership. Her message resonated with leaders who were facing similar challenges in their own units and organizations. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Maria told the conference attendees. "It requires persistent commitment to doing the right thing, even when it's difficult or unpopular. But when we create environments where every soldier can contribute their best, we all become stronger." The conference presentation led to additional opportunities for Maria to share her expertise and experience with military leaders around the world. She consulted on diversity and inclusion programs, contributed to leadership development curricula, and mentored other soldiers who were facing similar challenges. Throughout all of her success and recognition, Maria never forgot the importance of the tattoo that had started her journey at Fort Carson. The artwork remained a symbol of her heritage and her family's military service, but it had also become something more, a reminder that true professionalism and military bearing came from character and performance rather than appearance. The unit that had once been divided by prejudice and misunderstanding had become a model for effective leadership and inclusive culture. Soldiers who served under Maria's leadership consistently performed at high levels and went on to success in subsequent assignments. Many of them credited her mentorship and example with helping them develop their own leadership capabilities. As Maria reflected on her journey from an unwelcome newcomer to a respected senior leader, she understood that her experience represented something larger than personal success. Her story had become part of the Army's ongoing evolution toward a more inclusive and effective force that valued diversity while maintaining its core values and mission focus. The female soldiers who had once mocked her tattoo had learned valuable lessons about leadership, judgment, and the danger of making assumptions based on appearances. Several of them had gone on to leadership positions themselves, carrying with them the lessons they had learned from their interactions with Maria. Most importantly, the changes that had occurred at Fort Carson had created lasting positive impact for future soldiers. The unit's culture had been permanently transformed, creating an environment where soldiers from all backgrounds could succeed and contribute their best efforts to the mission. Maria's tattoo, which had once been a source of controversy and division, had become a symbol of the Army's capacity for growth and positive change. Her story demonstrated that excellence in service and commitment to others could overcome any barrier and create opportunities for meaningful contribution and leadership.